and that's late 24, early 25, is when we will get the blow off with long-term 10-year US treasuries. So we will have internal problems in the market, at the same time intensifying. So that will lead us into, frankly, a depression, which will be similar to what was experienced in 29-32.
Time has a peculiar way of echoing history's whispers, and today we find ourselves standing very close to the edge of a haunting possibility, a second Great Depression, a distant echo of the devastating economic collapse that scarred the 1930s. By the end of the video, we'll go through statements made by the British economist Simon Hunt and his predictions for the coming decade. He anticipates something on the horizon that, if realized, will absolutely shatter the bull market of the past decade, much like the 1929 crash ended the Roaring Twenties. Naturally, this would also lead to the collapse of the economy. I want to go a little bit deeper into what he sees, and we can judge for ourselves on how likely it is for this to happen. Welcome to Profit Protection, everybody, where we talk about all the topics important for investing, like technology and geopolitics. Hit the subscribe button for more videos like this in the future. We hope to see you there. So, the Great Depression of the 1930s stands as a stark reminder of economic turmoil's unparalleled impact. Back then, millions grappled with unemployment, poverty, and despair. Financial markets crumbled, businesses shattered, and ordinary lives were forever altered. It was a bleak chapter in history, one that teaches us the harrowing consequences that economic downturns can unleash on societies and nations. But before going further, we should probably identify similarities between the Great Depression and the circumstances we now face to see where they cross paths. So back then, there was a stock market bubble that burst, which put the economy into a tailspin. Today, we've seen bubbles in various things like tech stocks and cryptocurrencies. These bubbles can burst just as easily though. Income inequality was also a big issue back then, and it's kind of making a comeback now. The mega rich are accumulating wealth while many struggle to make ends meet. This kind of wealth gap can lead to social unrest and political instability, just like it did in the 1930s. And let's not forget that the global economy was a tangled mess back then too. Protectionist trade policies and a lack of international cooperation worsened the Great Depression. Today, our world is more interconnected than ever, so trade tensions and protectionism can have widespread consequences. And if you look at the political landscape, there are some unpleasant similarities. Both periods experienced waves of populism and heightened political polarization. In the 1930s, this was manifest in the rise of far-right and far-left movements in various parts of the world. Today, there has been a resurgence of populist leaders and movements globally. Now, a lot of things have happened in the early 2020s that have brought us to this point, but the pandemic was perhaps the most disruptive. COVID-19 didn't just disrupt our daily lives, it threw the global economy for a loop. Lockdowns messed up supply chains, closed down mom-and-pop shops, and sent unemployment skyrocketing. Factories shut down, workers couldn't get to work, and goods couldn't get to consumers. This jacked up production costs and showed us just how fragile our supply networks are. Sure, governments and central banks pulled out all the stops with stimulus measures, but the full consequences are still unraveling. Small businesses took the hardest hit. They're the lifeblood of many economies, and when they shutter, it's like a part of the economy's heart stops beating. The big concern here is that the loss of these businesses can have long-lasting economic effects. Not to mention that governments loaded up on debt to tackle COVID-19. This sounded good at the time, but now it's resulted in high debt, which means more interest payments, which can squeeze budgets. Furthermore, trade barriers such as tariffs and restrictions imposed during international disputes resemble throwing sand into the global economic gearbox. This friction slows down the flow of goods, which ultimately harms everyone involved. Geopolitical tensions create market uncertainty, making investors jittery and potentially leading to reduced investments or market volatility akin to a roller coaster ride on the stock exchange. Conflicts in energy-producing regions disrupt the energy supply chain, akin to a domino effect where one disruption affects the entire chain, leading to fluctuating energy prices and economic instability. While these global economic events might not single-handedly trigger a depression, when combined with existing economic vulnerabilities, they further stack the odds against us. Lingering uncertainty from these events can overshadow the economy, causing businesses to hesitate in investing and consumers to hold on to their wallets, hindering a swift recovery. Moreover, governments and central banks might struggle to respond effectively given high debt levels and historically low interest rates, limiting their options. Prolonged economic problems can also fuel social unrest and political chaos, resembling a pressure cooker ready to blow if steam isn't released. Now, the big question. Do we expect a new Great Depression? Projections done by the British economist Simon Hunt for the late 2020s paint a picture of a global economy facing a series of interconnected challenges. He believes there are multiple factors at play, but it all begins with the fundamental premise. There is a war going on.
Is going to take on a completely different posture, which is basically whether you call it World War III, I'm not sure, though in my gut it's saying it's going to be World War III.
So, global conflict and geopolitical tensions are at the forefront of these projections. It's important to note that when he talks about a possible World War III, we're not referring solely to the Russia and Ukraine situation. Many major nations are involved, each supporting different factions in various conflicts. But what does war have to do with the markets in the economy? Well, according to Hunt, the Federal Reserve, the key central authority in the markets, will need to reevaluate its policies in light of the war. Central banks will have to consider the ramifications of the war when making policy decisions. So right now, the Federal Reserve is implementing a strategy known as quantitative tightening, which involves removing money from the system. Hunt believes that they will soon reverse this policy though. This change will not only be due to the war, but also because of anticipated disruptions in the financial markets. Whether these disruptions are bank failures or a stock market crash, Hunt predicts that these events will serve as a justification for the Federal Reserve to shift back to quantitative easing, which means injecting money into the system rather than withdrawing it.
And that will be the excuse for the Fed to stop tightening and to go back by the end of this year, back to QE.
After this short-term correction in the financial markets, Hunt predicts that stocks will rise again, continuing until 2025. This optimism is driven by the expectation of central banks shifting to quantitative easing, which typically results in excess cash finding its way into financial markets, causing stock prices to rise. There is a suggestion that the S&P 500 could potentially double in value during this period. However, after stocks have doubled by around 2025, he predicts that a depression will follow, devastating not only the economy but also the entire stock market.
When the depression hits, do you see the markets coming down
Crashing.
because of that? Pardon?
Crashing.
Okay, good. That's all I wanted to know. Okay, so you do expect a market crash sort of by the end of 2026 or someplace like that.
So the recovery over the next 2 years should be used to save you during the depression.
Hunt also predicts that the US dollar in the long term will progressively decline. The reason being that because every year it gets devalued through the printing of money. He says that this rise in inflation that we've seen since 2020 is only just the start. This is the first and the smaller of two waves that we're going to see. The second wave will dwarf the level of the inflation we see today. The US CPI will probably be higher than the 1980 peak of 13.5%. This will result in US Treasuries blowing off in mid-2024 to around 11%, which will be the key ingredient to wreak havoc in the financial markets. Alongside this, Hunt believes the war will continue to intensify and combined with high Treasuries hurting the market will cause the next Great Depression.
Now, what follows is a collapse, as we see it, of the global financial system, with asset prices falling to the sort of rates that were experienced in 1929, 1932. and therefore copper and other commodity and metal prices will collapse also. And if one is taking it a stage further, what this leads to is a world of multinational currencies and a world where debt is not the driver of growth, but equity.
Adding complexity to the outlook is the Gleisberg cycle, which last occurred during the Dust Bowl decade of the 1930s, and if this cycle repeats in 2025, it could have profound implications for agricultural production.
One of the meteorologists that I follow, who's been very accurate, showing that in 24-25, we get the 90-year Gleisberg cycle coming in. And the last time we saw that in the 1930s was when we had the Dust Bowl.
Historically, such cycles have been associated with adverse weather conditions, potentially leading to droughts. If this pattern recurs, it could drive up food prices, further straining economic conditions. However, it's not all doom and gloom, and it's important to note that Hunt's predictions are on the extreme side. There are a lot of things that he's assuming here, and if only one of his predictions proves to be wrong, that can potentially ruin his overall forecast. Also, comparing today with the 1930s, you may say, is stretching it a little bit. Unlike the 1930s, we've got some advantages today. Central banks have fancy tools like what we've mentioned with quantitative easing, which does have its side effects, but can be utilized as we're not constrained by the gold standard like back in the day. It generally made central banks less equipped or inclined to respond as aggressively as in the 2020s. Moreover, modern central banks employ a wide array of unconventional methods, from negative interest rates to extensive asset purchases. We've also got safety nets today. Unemployment benefits and social programs can help soften the blow of economic downturns, and don't forget technology. While both periods saw technological advancements, today we live in an age defined by the digital revolution. With the internet, smartphones, and the capability to work and communicate remotely, we're better equipped for handling a crisis, both on an individual level and for society at large. The Great Depression teaches us valuable lessons though. Firstly, keep a close eye on the financial system with strong regulations. Nobody wants a repeat of a banking crisis. Secondly, deal with income inequality. Progressive taxation and social programs can help balance the economic scales. And lastly, work together globally. In an interconnected world, trade disputes and protectionism hurts everyone, so collaboration is the name of the game. The events of the past few years have spiraled the economy into a direction that would cause long-standing damage, even more so than before. Of course, every subsequent economic downturn presents its own challenges, but in a world that is so interconnected, the potential fallout urges everyone to take the necessary steps to avoid the current situation from dragging on and causing a paradigm shift in the global order. Thank you all for watching today's video. We appreciate you tuning into Profit Protection, and if you found it interesting, consider hitting that like button. If you want to stick around and see videos like the one you just saw or others, such as whether the European Union will collapse, we cover everything from geopolitics to technology and try to keep you folks informed on what matters, so consider subscribing to stay in the loop. As for now, that's all we have in store for you, and until next time, take care and I'll be seeing ya.